coronavirus kill astrology? I don't think so. But in a recent New York Times article that actually flew across my social media, it does look like an interesting conversation that could be brought up and done maybe a little bit better than what was written in the article. So for those of you who are really big into the astrology world and into the spiritual communities, or maybe on some periphery of the spiritual community, then you may have seen this, you may have heard about it. It's got a lot of people up in arms. Now it's only been out for a couple of days, but I've already seen on a few Facebook pages and on a couple of Instagram pages of friends of mine, peers of mine, some you know, some you might not know, where people are getting really upset about the conversation getting brought forward and what this might mean for astrology itself. Now, this is kind of a weird thing for me to bring up because back earlier this year, for those of you who watch my non-horoscope videos, or for those of you who are new, because this might be a popular video, I don't know, I actually made a video update about stepping back from doing astrology because I felt like there was a shift in the magnetics of what was going on, in the energy that the planets were giving off, and it made it very difficult for me to tap in, because I don't do this in a scientific way, I do it still in a very strictly spiritual way, to the energies in order to actually give predictions for general populations. But that's not because I have a bad opinion of astrology. I still use astrology in personal one-on-one readings, but not in general horoscopes meant for big groups. So I went to just doing tarot. And so for me, this is kind of an interesting thing to be talking about because I had already kind of stepped back. I did get a lot of flack for that in the beginning, and the article itself is neat because I kind of have a weird relationship with the diehard astrology fanatics. You know, sometimes they like me, sometimes they don't like me. And I have a very interesting relationship when it comes to anything that could be considered or construed to be mainstream or main media or conspiracy theories or politics, because I try to keep all of that out of my work, because I tend to try to keep a spiritually pure and spiritually focused space. I try not to focus on any of that. And so this is kind of getting out of my usual territories, so I want you guys to all just be kind of patient with me. The article itself is not really a hard indictment of astrology, but I can definitely see why certain people who are maybe deep in the astrology community or big followers of astrologers or just really enjoy astrology media might take serious offense to this, because it is written in a way that could actually be seen as either a soft indictment or trolling or even condescending. And I do feel that the author of this article is doing all three at different points. And when I say a soft indictment, I mean it's not actually an indictment. It's a question. It's passive-aggressive. It's creating doubt. It's planting seeds of doubt deliberately. I don't feel at all in the way that this person writes that they're actually doing this as a sincere inquiry. However, I do think that they make a very interesting couple of points as it relates to the society that has grown around astrology, especially within the last 10 years. And if you are one of my followers, then you know I do have some opinions about how that's been, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So the article goes on to take most of its focus and direct it at one fairly prominent astrologer. And she's prominent enough, she's mentioned in the article, I'll just say her name, Susan Miller. We all know who Susan Miller is. If you've been around, the astrology community for a bit, you're going to run into a Susan Miller article, or heck, you might even remember from back in 2006, 7, and 8 when she was actually doing horoscopes on demand on cable. And so she's been around for a minute. Right? She is definitely a big name in the astrology community. And so they kind of make a lot of glancing shots in her direction. Why weren't you able to predict this? You said that this sign was going to have a really, really awesome year, and obviously that's not what happened. How is it that astrology is even relevant for the individual while not also taking into account what is going on with political and financial systems? How is it that you can continue to push for this, that, and the other thing when this is what's going on? And why is it we've not been able to find an astrologer who is able to produce evidence that they were talking about a pandemic by name? Right? Because we've all heard, and even I've been talking about, dismantling going on. Societal dismantling, not like societal collapse, but the dismantling of structures, dismantling of old paradigm structures, things that have held, again, a lot of what we might consider to be routine existence in place. To be fair, yes, some of us stopped at that, and we did not actually go very specific with that, because maybe that was exactly all we could glean from what was coming through. Maybe it wasn't going to be a sickness. What if it was just a financial collapse? I've been predicting a financial collapse for 2020 for some time, and you can ask any of my clients who are real estate agents and brokers and whatnot. If you guys have YouTube accounts, post below, advocate. But I've been predicting that for a while, and a lot of other astrologers have as well, that there would be a huge economic upset, a huge bit of economic disruption. Now, what triggers an economic disruption? Well, that could be a lot of things. It could have been a trade war that went south. It could have absolutely have been a pandemic or some kind of global issue or even a war. So there is definitely some room for some credit to be given back to astrologers, even if it's only partial credit, that this particular author just chooses not to do. In fact, they go in the other direction. They say, okay, well, astrology is so general that anyone can kind of construe or misconstrue it to apply to themselves. And sort of, I think that really depends on a reader-to-reader basis. Yes, I do believe that there are a lot of astrology trenders out there and baby readers out there who are probably at the beginning of a new life process, and so they might be kind of grabbing the handbook and maybe getting to work a little bit too soon, in my opinion, and they're out there on YouTube. But I do think that to say that astrology itself is super, super general, that might be a bit of a stretch, and that would be something that I would ask this particular author to do a bit more research on. I feel like this was kind of just slapped together, because there's no way I think that any astrologer could have actually called it a pandemic that has still some dubious origins. And I'm going to call it dubious origins as far as I'm concerned. My own personal research, my own personal readings into it, I actually keep seeing it showing up in multiple places simultaneously. Am I saying that that is something that is invalidating a lot of conspiracy theories? No. Am I saying that if you are sticking to one theory and holding on to that as though that's the only thing keeping your life afloat, you need to do better? Because there is something here, right? But I feel like there's more to it than that. To say that somebody was going to get that exact when doing a general global reading, that was not going to happen. But what ends up happening here is that we have somebody who's taking a gross oversimplification for how the process works and turning it into an article that is a bit inflammatory. And to me, it honestly is no different than somebody trying to make sort of a broad gesture to sow doubt, to sow skepticism, just to do it. Now, of course, there will be the I'm a rational skeptic type, but when you're going to be skeptical as a way to give a soft indictment of something, you're not actually doing a very good job of giving an indictment. You need to be doing better than just presenting intrigue and questions. All it's showing is that you don't know what you're actually talking about. You don't know what's really going on. You're a little bit confused and you're not convinced. That doesn't actually say you know a damn thing about what you're actually talking about. It says nothing about what you know about astrology, about Susan Miller, or anything else that is actually going on here. So I'm a little bit bothered by the fact that this article even exists just on that point. However, I do think that there is a space in this article where I actually am very intrigued because, again, for those of you who are familiar with anything that I make that's not horoscope related, or anyone who's maybe had a conversation with me, I do have some of the same criticisms about the culture around astrology and the mainstreaming of spirituality and the New Age over the course of the last 10 years. For those of you who don't know me, I have no intention of trying to present myself as an aspirational life coach, abundance guru in a penthouse. I never made it a point to try and market myself as a sponsor for public recovery. But that is something that I think in a lot of ways has sort of become a toxic norm that to me I feel is actually a poison in this community in a lot of respects. I do believe if a person is really working on raising their level of consciousness and getting out of the old paradigm, and yet they are still taking political sides and they are still trying to validate toxic emotions in the collective, or they are trying really, really hard to just make an extra 10,000 subscribers by living off of a hashtag to hashtag mentality, then they are actually not as far along as they think. At the end of the article, they actually make a very, very interesting point that even though Susan Miller maybe did not predict coronavirus, and she did actually say that this was going to be a wonderful year for many signs, and by the way, if we're talking about a year, this is just way too soon to call it bad. You know, we don't want to split things into black and white. You know what it means when you're splitting, right? It's all bad or it's all good. That's never good. All right, so author, work on that. The last line of the article is actually one of the ones I like that draws my attention the most, and something that I wish that this particular author had actually spent more time on. For her legion of loyal fans, though, the medium may matter more than the message. And that's something I think is actually worth exploring and talking about when it comes to checking our progress in our own spiritual growth, taking ownership of our own process and progress, evolving out of, and yes, unfortunately, I've seen it. I've been doing this for 7 years online, and I've been at my practice since the late 90s. The act of projecting a messianic persona or image onto somebody that you find to be an inspirational speaker, or somebody who makes you feel good, or somebody who lifts you up at the end of the day, is actually not healthy. This author, I think, would have made a really cool article if they wanted to talk about the dangers of a codependent relationship with one's reader, with one's astrologer, with one's spiritual practitioner. Now, to be fair, I can't take credit for that. I actually made a video recently where a comment came from a really insightful subscriber who said, look, too many people are engaging in codependent relationships with readers these days. And she was correct. I'm assuming it was a she. I apologize. But this is absolutely where I think this article could have done an awesome job and opened up a really cool conversation. When it comes to the celebrity model or the idol model around readers, around spiritualists, around astrologers, and so on and so forth, I like to think of myself as a bit of an outlier and a bit of an outsider. And I think that might be because I wanted to be. And I definitely chose to be. There are plenty of astrologers out there who started at the same time as myself who ended up actually surpassing me in numbers very, very quickly after being neck and neck, essentially, for about 5 to 6 years. However, an interesting turn happened just as we got to about 2015, 2016, where anyone and everyone who knew how to spout the right stuff could suddenly become incredibly well-liked and incredibly insulated by a lot of codependent interactions and codependent energy feeding going on between them and their following. A lot of the 20 teens, to me, was very reminiscent of the yuppie 80s, in the sense that it was about ambition, drive, abundance, prosperity, as well as the focus on status and a preoccupation with status. It was only a matter of time before a lot of what was actually more reserved to the more deeply and dedicated, spiritually practiced individuals would suddenly have to share room. And a lot of that was gaining a lot of traction throughout the 20-teens, especially the latter half, 2015 until now. And a lot of it actually centered around an interesting combination of both glamour and sort of a soft-serve therapeutic approach. For me, that was always something that was very difficult for me to grab onto or even jump into, because I did not actually start my spiritual practice around these times. I started back in '97. I didn't have a spiritual awakening that came after a traumatic or life-changing event. I didn't have this aha moment that kind of propelled me down a road, and I had to go find all of this stuff out myself or with friends. I did not have the internet or a big Facebook group or even access to maybe an event, a retreat, or a shop that would just kind of like take me in and just sort of engulf me. So it's a very interesting phenomena for someone like me to witness. And I've talked to many of my friends and peers who are in the same space as me who feel the same way. In fact, a lot of what is out there can sometimes be seen as sort of a spiritually dressed up version of cognitive behavioral therapy, or possibly even something that comes out of a 12-step program or a recovery program. In a recent video where I actually open up for the first time, I actually talk about where when I started to see that, I was actually taken aback by it. And everyone was kind of creating these circles, or even sometimes, yes, cults of personality. I was sitting here kind of like, what is going on? Get out of my house. And that's how I thought. I had to get over it really quickly, right? Because obviously that was coming from a place. But my initial response was, wow, what is this? What is going on here? And it did feel, as somebody who had been, at that point, already stepped into the 20th year of their own journey, as though the practice of one's spiritual growth, the elevation of their consciousness, personal mastery, as well as the expansion of their own soul awareness was being co-opted by a bunch of feel-good life coaches, hashtags, things masquerading as 12-step programs, and even sometimes patients posing as practitioners. And I say that when I mean somebody who is clearly not in a place to actually be offering advice and success stories about their recovery process, and still having people pay them to share their journey through every single moment of their recovery process with them. So there was definitely a weird schism that was happening that I actually got to witness. And as things got past 2016, 2017, 2018, then yes, the financial world got in there, and the political world got in there, and I watched people getting recruited left and right, and all of a sudden, certain messages were starting to get skewed in a certain political direction, whether it was pro-Trump, or pro-Hillary, or pro-Sanders, or pro-Democrat, or pro-conservative. And you saw a lot of these circles, a lot of these communities, a lot of these narratives start to get turned into, essentially, religion. And I'm not saying this in a way to hurt people. I hope I'm not. I'm not a very PC person. But to me, it feels a lot like what was going on was a lot of people looking for church. And I'm not saying that in a way that's bashing people who like to go to church. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that astrology itself, spiritual practice itself, tarot, energy work, it's really more of a martial art than a religion, so I don't know how that was ever going to be something that could be sustainable. So when you get a bunch of people that are kind of coming together to consume the experience, consume the energy, consume the information, and yet not at the same time grow, except for maybe getting a few new tools at a much slower rate than if they actually were working in a solitary fashion, in an independently motivated fashion, or maybe an externally motivated fashion. You could always motivate them to do it themselves instead of relying on you. You've got a serious problem on your hands. Now, am I saying this is all astrologers out there? Absolutely not. I have plenty of friends who still practice astrology for general populations. Me stepping back and choosing not to do astrology as far as my general horoscopes is concerned is because I don't feel I can tap into the shifting energies of the astrology right now. I don't feel like they, in my experience and the way I read, it is applicable to what is going on, and I feel like it needs time and possibly even needs to be restudied, and I'm actually doing that as well. So I'm sticking to tarot. Now, does that mean I have a bad opinion of astrologers who are still doing astrology? No. I still do astrology for one-on-one clients. Do I have a bad opinion of astrologers who are doing it for general audiences? No. But I do think that this article actually prompted the real conversation, even though they didn't have the real conversation. It is not moving forward if we are just creating a new religion. It is not evolution if it is becoming political. It is not new paradigm if it is still preoccupied with financial this, political that, let's create a new religion, or let's do the slow drip recovery program. It's not actually all it can be. So all I would ask is that people actually make sure that the person that they're working with, or the astrologer, or or whoever they are looking at, is dedicated to more than just simply trying to be trendy, or to monetize their personal healing journey, or start a religion, or do something that, beyond just simply give hopeful predictions so you keep coming back. If it looks like they're trying to create some kind of cult of personality around themselves, if they're trying to become the champion of, a political movement, getting into the us versus them mentality, people who are truly evolved, people who are on a truly higher spiritual level and dimension, don't do that. They don't push duality, they don't recruit, they don't try to they don't densify and dumb down the divine just so it feels applicable to the mundane. So if you find people are kind of doing that a lot, I'd probably take a step back. I'd probably just, let that be. But this article is a gross oversimplification. It's not at all talking about constructive ways to actually observe a spiritual path and practice. It's not really talking at all about where there are ways to actually avoid the pitfalls it brings up, and it's not actually talking about the breadth of the full evolution of the process anyway. Hell, I quit before... I stopped doing predictive astrology before coronavirus was even considered a thing in America, so I was like, okay, wow. Wonder what that would look like. For those of you that may not be practicing as astrologers, or maybe you are in a situation where you maybe catch yourself or notice a friend maybe actually developing a rather codependent relationship with a particular reader, or maybe their message or the practice of astrology itself, that really says more about the message they're receiving, but also at the same time what is going on with their own inner mentality that is interpreting it that way. I've had plenty of people try really hard to maybe even have that kind of connection with me. Maybe they do need to feel like they are a part of that kind of congregation of some kind. Check in with people who might actually be in a place where they are super vulnerable to that kind of message, and they are very easily kind of swayed into that. Because here's the thing, astrologers out there and readers out there who push that kind of message, that are trying to build a church around themselves, are actually not doing the good work. And that's something I wish that this frickin' author actually made a distinction with. That this is not actually all astrology is all about. Address the misconception. That's not, even if that's how it became mainstream in the last 10 years, that's not what this is about at all. I wish that distinction was made so much, because you know what, it's just really, I've already had enough BS when it comes to kind of creating that distinction between what was 20 teens mainstream and what is a real, dedicated, intentional spiritual practice. God, this article pisses me off. So, anyway guys, I don't know how to wrap this up. I just figured I would share some thoughts. And it looks like it's 11:11, as I do it anyway. So I might as well finish this up, let you go, and we will talk soon.